Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Before we start, Brian would like to share a couple of things with you. First, did you know that Brian is a life coach, a grief guide, and a mental fitness trainer? Brian would love to help you with whatever life issues are challenging you. Brian has years of experience as well as training. You can contact Brian at www.grieftogrowth.com to learn more. Brian is the author of the best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted, Not Buried, which you can get on Amazon or Brian's website. This is a great book if you're in grief or to give to someone you know who is dealing with grief. Lastly, Brian creates free and paid resources for your growth. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/gifts, www.grief2growth.com to sign up for his newsletter. Choose a gift just for signing up and keep up with what Brian is offering. And now, here's today's episode. Please enjoy.
Hey, everybody, this is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And today I've got with me a fascinating guest. Her name is Julie Ryan. She's a psychic medium and she's a medical intuitive. She can sense what medical conditions and illnesses a person has, and she can facilitate energetic healings. She can communicate with spirits, both alive and dead. She can scan animals. She can access people's past lives, and she can tell how close to death someone is. Her book, Angelic Attendants, What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next, describes a series of events that involves angels, multitudes of deceased family and friends, the spirits of deceased pets, and countless serendipitous and miraculous moments. Her Angel Messages books are picture books that have angels answering kids' tough questions. Each week, Julie scans callers on her Ask Julie Ryan International podcast. She's a businesswoman, she's an inventor, she's an author, she's a podcaster, and she's a serial entrepreneur. Her surgical device inventions are sold globally, and she has founded 9 countries in 5 different industries. Julie's psychic and medical intuitive skills are learned. So with that, I'd like to welcome to Grief to Growth, Julie Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. That's quite a bio that you have.
Yeah, well, in my spare time, it's fun.
Yeah. So you're a serial entrepreneur. You're an inventor. How did you get into becoming a medical intuitive and a medium?
Great question. I am not a psychic. There are many, and I'm not one of them who had dead people chasing them as little children. I didn't have dead people chasing me, or if I did, I didn't know it, let alone what I would have done with that information. I learned how to do all of this stuff, Brian. So I'm a businesswoman and an inventor who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness. Because whenever we connect with spirit, you can do anything with it. And that's why I have all these different offerings that I work with every day with people from all over the world. And I get to meet some just really remarkable people. And every client is different, obviously, but the things that we talk about and the things they want to discuss are different. And so it's just a blast. It's so much fun.
So how did you even get interested in this spiritual aspect of life?
Well, raised Roman Catholic. Mm-hmm. So as a little child, I was taught about angels and saints and the Holy Spirit and stuff like that. So I think that foundation was laid then. And then Probably the thing that piqued my interest the most was I was watching Oprah one day and Shirley MacLaine came on.
Mm.
And that was when she released her book Out on a Limb. And she really was the first one that I heard talking about past lives and things like that. And I thought, well, how interesting is that? Fast forward probably 10 or 15 years, and a friend gave me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mace, who called herself a medical intuitive. And I thought, what the heck is that? I'd never heard that term before. And I was an inventor of surgical devices and had been in the hospital supply industry my whole career. So I was helping doctors and medical providers help people heal. And I thought, okay, I need to find out what's going on with that. So I read her book and I wanted to know more. And this is 30 years ago, Brian. So we didn't have the internet yet. Mm-hmm. So I did the old fashioned thing and I went to a Barnes and Noble bookstore to see what else they had. I figured there'd be more in the bookstore perhaps than even the library on this topic. And I found a book called Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan. Now she's a PhD, she's deceased now, but her whole concept was parlaying very complex quantum physics principles into understandable English for the non-scientific mind. She was a former NASA physicist when she was doing this work. And I thought, okay, I'm going to read this. And she talked about using energy to help facilitate healing. And I read her book and I wanted to know more. So I called her school in New York and I said, do you guys have anybody in my area that's teaching this stuff? And lo and behold, they did. And so I started studying it. And I studied a pretty intense curriculum for about 6 years and learned how to do this stuff. Now, fast forward 40 years later, after she wrote this stuff, I teach people all over the world how to do what I do, but it's quick. It's in about 12 or 13 hours. And
really?
It's kind of like we used to use carrier pigeons, and then we went to horseback riders delivering the mail, and then the Wells Fargo wagon. And, now we can communicate electronically. So I think it's fast forward 40 years and the technology's advanced enough that we don't need to be in it for years on end to learn this stuff.
I don't think I've ever heard of anybody teaching something like that. And I've heard of Reiki, of course. I've actually taken Reiki. Is what you do similar to Reiki, or how is it similar and how is it different?
Reiki's a really good place to start. It's a really good foundation about energy, energy healing. What I do is I connect to somebody energetically. I raise my vibrational level to the level of spirit, because we're all spirits attached to a body having a human experience. We've all heard that. And so I've learned to raise my vibrational level. It takes me less than a nanosecond. I'll close my eyes. I'll watch a laser beam come from my body. For instance, I'm in Birmingham, Alabama. You're in Cincinnati. I'm going to watch a laser beam in my mind's eye hook into you. And then it's going to be as if I'm looking at a hologram of you. And it's as if I'm looking at an X-ray or a CT scan or an MRI. And so that's how I connect. And then something will be identified, and then I'll watch energetic healings immediately begin after something's identified. Those can take the form of something getting added, something getting removed. I watch procedures all the time in my mind's eye that emulate what I saw in the operating room for decades, and they're trying prototypes, developing new products, things like that. Sometimes I see healings that utilize methodologies and devices that haven't been invented yet. And regardless of what I'm seeing in my mind's eye, Brian, I'm really descriptive with the person with whom I'm working, because if you can envision what I'm seeing, it helps integrate the healing into the body. So I get to see amazing healings happen every day.
Mm-hmm. So, and this is something that you learned how to do. That's I think that fascinates me almost more than anything, because I do know people that do similar things, but they seem to, it's a gift, I guess. It's something that they were born with. So, and you also do mediumship, I understand.
Yeah, I do that. So we can talk to any spirit. And so what I'm doing is my spirit's connecting to somebody else's spirit when I'm doing a medical scan and healing on them. And I can communicate with people telepathically if they're still alive. Like you've got a loved one who's in a coma and we're trying to figure out what their wishes are or where their living will is or whatever. We can get that kind of information, communicate with any spirit. that was with a deceased person and now they're in heaven. Doesn't matter whether we knew them or not, because our heads are big satellite dishes. They receive and they transmit frequencies. Every spirit has a frequency they keep throughout all of their lifetimes. So in order to get in touch with any spirit, whether they're attached to a body or not is irrelevant. We just think of them. That tunes our satellite dish head to their frequency. And it's like we have a two-way radio channel that's open then, and we can communicate with them. So who do you want to talk to? You want to talk to a deceased loved one? Do you want to talk to Elvis or Mother Teresa or Queen Elizabeth or whoever? It doesn't matter. You just think of them and then you're immediately connected to them. So everybody has this ability. We all come in with it. We're all born with it. It's just a matter of developing and enhancing it.
I've heard people say that, and it's interesting because I don't feel like I could do that, and I've done a little bit of I studied mediumship a little bit, and I've had a couple kind of hits, but it just seems like to me like it feels like it's beyond my abilities. So it'd be interesting to see if I could do something like that.
Well, have you ever had a thought of somebody and you either get a call from them or a text or you run into them or an email and you say, oh my gosh, I was just thinking of you this morning. And you think, oh, what a coincidence. Well, you're doing it when that happens. That's your intuitive ability at work. And that's how it works. Or you think something's going to happen and it does. Mm-hmm. Or you think, oh, I don't need to go down this road because it's going to be closed. And you're thinking, oh, that's crazy. There are no signs. And you're going down the road and guess what? It's closed. We're all doing it. We just don't recognize it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's, we're so wrapped up with our rational minds and we've been all taught to kind of disbelieve in intuition, right? And to believe that things are only coincidence. So I will say that I have definitely seen a lot more synchronicities in my life in the last 5, 6, 7 years since I started really believing in it and looking for it. So it's things aren't random. And I think, and I know people do have intuition. So, but I said for to take it to the level that you've taken to, it's astounding.
Well, I talk to a lot of people between my show and my clients with whom I work every workday. I probably scan 3,000 people a year.
Oh, wow.
So the more you do it,
yeah,
it's just second nature.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is the more you communicate with spirit or you try to communicate with spirit, it's that first thing that comes in your head. Comes in like a thought in your head, fast as you can snap your fingers or before, because time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time's a human creation, linear time as we know it. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes you'll be thinking of something and you'll get a thought in your head that'll come in that'll feel like an answer to what you're thinking, but you haven't thought the thought all the way. Yeah. And you'll think, oh, that's just my imagination. No, it's because whoever the spirit is with whom you're communicating, they've already got what you're thinking before you can think it out all the way, and they're responding to you. So spirit communicates with a thought in our heads. It comes in instantly, and that's how you know that something's going on. That's how you know that's an answer from spirit. If you think about it for a couple of seconds, that's your brain talking to you. I had a client this morning, just before I got on with you, who told me that she lost her sister recently and she was crying so hard on the way home from the hospital that she said, I could barely see the road. And she said, all of a sudden I got in my neighborhood and the speed limit's really slow. She said it was 25 miles an hour and they really enforce it. And she said, all of a sudden there was a cardinal that showed up next to her driver's window, and the cardinal flew with her all the way into her driveway. And then when she turned off the car and was getting ready to get out of the door, it flew away. And she said, my first thought was that was my mom who's in heaven. That was my mom sending that cardinal to comfort me, to let me know that she was with me and that everything was going to be okay. And I said, you're right. That's exactly it. And she said, that was my first thought. And then I thought, oh, I'm just, out of my mind. I'm just imagining that. And I said, no, you weren't. Your first thought was correct.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that we all need to keep in mind, especially as people who were talking before we started recording. I'm an engineer. I'm very, kind of rational person, I like to believe anyway. And we'll talk ourselves out of signs, and I find myself like, I always try to figure out what are the odds of this happening? How rare is this, or is this just a normal thing? So yeah, I tell people the same thing you're saying. Go with your first thought. If you think it's a sign, then it's a sign.
Right.
So can you give me a couple of examples of some healings that you've done?
Sure. Oh, yeah. Lots of them. What's really fun is when somebody needs a new organ, like they need a new kidney or a liver. And I watch stem cell energy regenerate a new or generate a new organ, any body part. When I first started doing this work, Brian, and this is a long time ago, decades ago, I would watch a donor patient. Well, it would be like I was in the operating room, an energetic operating room, and I'd watch a donor patient be there, and I'd watch the recipient there. I'd watch the organ get harvested from the donor patient. I'd watch it get put into the recipient. Now I don't see that anymore. For probably the past 5 or 6 years, everything's done with stem cell energy. And so I'll watch, and again, I'm an inventor. You're an engineer. So I'll watch a template or a mold of that kidney, for instance, and I'll watch stem cell energy, which looks like a light amber colored gel, has sparkles in it because it's woo-woo. Got to have sparkles. And it has a watery consistency. It reminds me of this hair gel when I was a kid called Dippity Doo.
Yeah.
Reminds me, you remember Dippity Doo?
Yeah, sure.
Young people say, I've never heard of that. And I'll say, look it up. And then they'll send me a commercial from the 60s or something. It's hysterical. But anyways, I'll watch it get generated. I'll watch the plumbing get clamped off into the kidney. I'll watch the diseased kidney get removed. I'll watch the new kidney get put in, and then I'll watch all the plumbing get hooked back up. And then I watch it get unclamped like they do in the operating room. They're checking to make sure that there aren't any leaks. And then we'll go down the road and see how the patient's doing. Oftentimes that will show up on a scan and it freaks out the docs. It's just so funny. I've gotten calls over the years where a doctor will call me and say, okay, what are you doing? And how does this stuff work? And so I'll explain to them what I'm seeing. I believe what I'm seeing in my mind's eye is what our bodies do on their own. Because if you go back to your grade school science lessons, we all learned that every cell has a nucleus. Every nucleus is surrounded by cytoplasm. Cytoplasm's a watery gel like Dippity Doo. Yeah. And our bodies have a centrifugal force in them that spins, and that's what causes the cells to divide and replicate to the tune of billions of them a day. I'm watching in this healing happen what our bodies do naturally. I'm just watching it in warp speed. So I get these visuals that are really hilarious at times. And it's so that we can have a human frame of reference for this energy healing that's happening. Because number one, we can't see it. And number two, we don't know about that. That's something new. So an example of a kidney that was replaced was in a 4-year-old little girl. And they did a scan on her. She was on the donor list. And so she would go in and they would do CT scans on her frequently just to be sure that her kidneys were functioning and she didn't need to go on dialysis and all that. That was part of her checkups. And so one day she was in there and the doctor came out and he said, I don't know what to tell you. I had seen this healing happen on her. She was one of the first ones. And the doctor said, I don't know what to tell you, but the scans just didn't look right. So we're going to do another set. So they did. They took her back, did another set. They came out. They said, okay, we don't know how to explain this, but she's got a normal looking kidney, but it's the size of a kidney that we'd see in like a 10 or 11-year-old. So her one kidney looks like a 4-year-old, the one that's functioning. The one that was diseased is not there anymore, but it looks like it belongs to a 10 or 11-year-old. We don't know what to tell you about it. And so the mother called me and said, how old was the donor patient? And I said, I don't know. Let me go back. And so I'll do an instant replay, which I did. And I looked under the sheet to see how old the donor patient was, the spirit of the donor patient. And it was a child that looked like a 5th grader, 6th grader, something like that. And long story short, the child never had any kidney problems after that.
Oh, wow.
She is now out of college. She's married. She's got a child and she's doing fine. Now, was that me doing that? No. It was spirit working through me and with me to help facilitate healing. We all heal ourselves. Nobody heals anybody else. No doctor, no medical provider, no, nobody. We send the healing energy. That person's spirit will integrate it based on what it wants to explore. And the work that I do on the healing side of the equation is just that. It's part of the healing equation, in addition to Eastern medicine, Western medicine, whatever. It's just all part of that healing modality, but the person integrates all of those as they choose.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's growth2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode. So I'm interested in that example you just gave where there was like a donor. Is the donor, you said a spirit donor. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So, and that was a long time ago. So now I just see stem cell energy that generates those organs. Stem cell energy is the coolest stuff. It'll regenerate any body part we need. I mean, it's amazing what I watch get healed. So when I used to see a donor patient, that's an analogy. It's a metaphor for the energy healing that's happening. And it was shown to me in a way so that I could understand it and I could relay that to my client. Back then, we didn't know about stem cell energy.
Right.
So I didn't have that as a frame of reference. My frame of reference was what's happening in the operating room when there's an organ transplant. Now, fast forward, we've got a lot of information about stem cell energy and stem cells being used to heal. And so I have a different frame of reference because things have evolved.
Yeah. Now, do you work with a team on the other side? Or is there a team of doctors or something on the other side that you're aware of, or how does that work?
I don't dissect it like that. It's just spirit.
Okay.
It's all God, the universe, all our spirit guides, all our angels, all our deceased loved ones, my clients' deceased loved ones, my deceased loved ones. I don't differentiate. It's just spirit working through me and with me to help facilitate healing.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious because I know people that are medical intuitives, and they say they have a team of I think this is all metaphorical or in a sense, so we can kind of relate to it. So I was just curious how you experience it.
The interesting thing about that is I perceive spirit is going to show up in a different form. Like my main spirit guide is a dead Pope. And I'd love to tell you stories about him in a little bit when you're ready. And so that spirit showing up as Pope Clement VI, but it's just big spirit. But it's coming to me in a way that it's easier for me to understand that I'm communicating with this dead Pope, because that goes in with my frame of reference in looking at somebody who has, some knowledge that I don't have. We all look for people to guide us. We're looking for mentors, we're looking for teachers. And it's easier a lot of the time for us to say, okay, Einstein's teaching me instead of big spirit, the collective consciousness, energy. That's a little esoteric for most of us to be able to absorb. So I believe that's why spirit will show up in different forms, as an angel, as a spirit guide, as a whatever, so that it's easier for us to assimilate that information in our human brains.
Right. So you have to tell me about your Pope spirit guide. That's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah. Oh, he's a riot. Pope Clement VI, he showed up one day And I was with my mentor, and there was a healing. And when she's doing a healing on me, I can see all my deceased loved ones that are, their spirits are on either side of the table where I'm laying, and she's zapping on me. So one day this dead Pope shows up, Brian. And I said, well, who are you? He's got the Pope hat on and the shepherd's rod and the whole 9 yards. And I said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm Clement. And I said, oh, I never heard of Pope Clement. And he laughed and he said, well, I was number 6. I said, okay, great. Why are you here? What can I, I was a little more polite than that. I said, how may I help you?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. And I said, well, yeah, I'm a businesswoman. I'm not doing that. People are going to think I'm nuts. And he said, yeah, just get on with it. He said, it's been so bastardized throughout the ages, and there's nothing to be afraid of. And you know it because I'd seen it many times.
Mm-hmm. And
what happens when somebody's dying. And he said, just get on with it. And you're supposed to teach the world what happens. So fine. Yeah. See you. Bye. Thanks a lot. No, thanks.
Yeah.
So I get in my car to leave, Brian. And I just for kicks, I looked up on my phone, Pope Clement VI. Well, come to find out, this guy was in office during the Black Plague.
Oh, wow.
When 2/3 of Europe died, and he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I thought, oh, for heaven's sakes, I can't make that up.
Yeah.
And so he's been my main spirit guide ever since. He treats me like a Nike ad. He'll say, yeah, just do it. I'll say, I can't do that. He'll go, yeah, just do it. So here I am all these years later. And so that's my main mission, is to help people understand what happens from the spiritual side of the equation when somebody's dying.
Yes, and that's I met you last summer in Phoenix, and I saw you give a presentation on what happens when someone's dying. And I know we don't have time to go through it in detail now, but if you could just maybe quickly summarize what you talked about, because that was the first time I'd heard it at that level of detail.
Sure. Most of us are well acquainted with at least the concept of the afterlife and for near-death experiences, but there's not a lot written about what's happening when somebody's actually dying. We've seen it in the movies, ghosts and other stuff where spirits can show up or whatever, but there isn't really much information. And that's what I see in my mind's eye, is how we're surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as we're transitioning. And I have coined the process the 12 phases of transition. And it's a series of events that involves different configurations of all these spirits that are there with somebody as they're transitioning. And so I can, and all my graduates of my class, we can click into anybody anywhere in the world. If you were on Mars, I could click into you there. It doesn't matter. I would watch my laser beam come attach to you. And then I can tell, based on what phase of transition they're in, how close to death they are. I can communicate with the patient telepathically, even if they can't communicate to their families. And I always ask them 3 questions, Brian. Number 1, are you ready to go? Yes, they give me a yes or a no. Are you in pain? What do you need? And then what do you need just runs the gamut. It can be from, I'd like a chocolate bar, to, I need to, one of my favorite stories is working with a family in Athens, Greece, and the father was dying and the father couldn't communicate verbally. And so I said, what do you need? And he said, I need to see my sister. So I was on the phone with his wife and I said, he wants to see his sister. Is she close by? And she said, no, she's in Australia. I said, well, get her on the Zoom or get her on a FaceTime or something. They did. And he passed the next day. That's what he needed before he passed. So it's really a glorious situation when somebody is transitioning. And that is the opposite end of the spectrum of the heart-wrenching part from our human equation. Mm-hmm. And my parish pastor said something one time during a sermon. He said, people are so afraid to die because they don't know if they're going to fly or they're going to fry. We've been so inundated, especially in the Western cultures, about that in the Judeo-Christian religions. And so Pope Clement said, okay, you're supposed to teach people what happens when somebody's dying. First time I saw all of this transpire was when my own mother was dying in 2002.
Mhm. So the lecture that you gave, do you teach that somewhere, or is it available that people can get to it? Because I thought it was fascinating.
Yes, I do. My book, Angelic Attendants, I have props. I'm like a game show girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes through it. And then also on my website, askjulieryan.com, Brian, anybody can go to the 12 phases of transition. And there's a chart there that's
Yes.
a graphic that people can download for free. And if somebody has a loved one at the end of their lives, I'll say, download that, put it on your phone, and then you just ask, what phase of transition is my mom in, or my grandmother, or whomever, and you'll hear a number in your head right away. And then you can refer to the chart and it'll give you information, not to mention it's going to give you comfort and peace to know that your loved one is surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones and pets, which came in really handy during the pandemic.
Yes.
Just so many people couldn't be with their loved ones in a hospital or a nursing home. And they've really been suffering because they think, oh my gosh, my grandmother died all alone.
Yeah.
Nobody dies alone. Everybody's surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones and pets.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because when I work with people, it's interesting. We go to the worst case scenario in our heads. They died alone. They died in pain. They died scared. And it's, I don't know why we do that to ourselves, what people do. So I think the more knowledge that we have, the less fear that we have. And then there's the guilt sometimes people will have because they weren't able to be there.
Right, right. And the thing about this too is when we can start to identify who the family members are, we can describe them and describe the pets, which is hilarious. I'll say, did your grandmother grow up on a farm? Because there are farm animal spirits in the room. There's like cows and chicks and ducks and lammies and stuff like that. And they'll say yes. And then they'll start to name the animals. I'll describe what a horse looks like or what a dog looks like. I had a client a couple of days ago and her mother was dying. And I was describing the scene that I was seeing in my mind's eye, whatever phase of transition she was in. And I said, and there's a goat's spirit in the room. Did your mom have a pet goat or something? And she said, yeah, she did. And her name was, I don't know, Lulu or whatever. She told me what the goat's name was. So when that starts to happen, people start to relax a little bit. And I always say, look for the miracles along the way because they'll be plentiful. Most interesting point about all of this is there has been university-based research done with people at the end of their lives that shows that 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets, either in dreams or visions. 90%. And I've done university-based research on my medical devices before I was allowed to sell them. You know, we had to get through the governing bodies, the FDA and their equivalent in other countries. So I know what's involved with that. I know how rigorous that is. And that's not an easy task. And I think that that's remarkable. And I tease the author of the study. I say, I love it when science catches up with woo-woo. Woo-woo's been around for forever. Interestingly enough, on that point too, Brian, if you look at all of the religious texts and all the great classical literature, well, it goes back to the ancient Greeks and Shakespeare's King Lear and Plato's Republic. And perhaps the most well-known story is the Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. I mean, this stuff's all throughout history, and it's in the Renaissance paintings. People have been seeing this since the beginning of time. I believe since we've become more well-educated and more proof-based, we want proof for this. Well, now this research is showing that we have proof.
Yes. And, with you being in the medical field and me being, in the scientific field as an engineer and stuff, it's interesting to me. And I like the way you said it, that science seems to be catching up with what we've known for a very long time. But we've come to the point we dismiss our own subjective experience, right? So if I have an experience and I can't prove it to people, then they dismiss it. And I wrote a great book about near-death experiences. This guy's laid out a philosophical and logical proof of why he thinks the near-death experience, is proof of the afterlife. But people say, well, because we can't study it in a lab, because we can't replicate it, then it's not objective and therefore it's not real. So, I've had so many people say to me, well, prove this to me. And I'm like, do you believe that millions of people, billions of people have had this experience and they've all described it, but you still don't believe it? And it's almost kind of funny.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, it is. And I love the quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist. And he said, just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it isn't true.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't get much pushback from people on spiritual things. But every once in a while, I'll have somebody say, well, you got to prove this to me. I don't believe that you're really doing this. And I'll say, well, do you pray? And they'll say, well, of course I pray. And I'll say, oh, to whom are you praying? And they'll say, Jesus or a saint or the Virgin Mary or Buddha or whomever. And I'll say, okay, so when you're praying, do you get answers to your prayers? And they say, yeah, all the time. I say, okay, so when you're sitting on the couch, does that mean Jesus is sitting next to you on the couch and you can see him and you can hold his hand? And they'll say, well, no, that's different. And then you can see the wheels start to turn in their head. And I'll say, oh, you're talking to a spirit and a spirit is guiding you. And they'll say, well, that's not the same thing. I'll say, oh, but it is.
Yes. Yes.
And then that you start to see their wheels turn in their head and it'll give them some fodder to ponder and look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah. That's a good point. There's so much fear I find with people. And even, when I post my videos of like near-death experiences and, I'll have people come and they'll say, well, I don't believe anything that man says. I only believe the Bible. And I'm like, that one guy said, I don't believe any of man's experiences. I only believe the Bible. And I'm like, who do you think wrote the Bible? And what do you think it's about? It's about men's experiences. But because it's in those pages, they trust that, but they don't trust, the fact, like you're, for example, doing what you're doing. It's the same thing that Jesus was doing. I mean, they all believe that Jesus was able to go out and do miracles and heal people. And Jesus said that we would do greater things than he did.
Exactly. I have a dear friend who's a world-renowned geneticist, and he had some stuff going on. And so he called me and he said, can you do a scan on me? Because I got this stuff going on. And I said, okay, fine. So I did, connected to him. I wasn't with him at the time. And I was nailing all this stuff that was going on with him. He didn't tell me anything. And then we did something in part of the healing where I saw a scene of a situation that he was in as a small boy. I'd never heard of it. I told him who was there, what happened, all of that. And he goes, okay, I will never doubt what you do again, because there's no way I could have known not only the medical stuff, but also what the situation was when he was a little boy. And so I think when we do have the opportunity to work with somebody and they come in with, they call it evidential answers, whatever. People call themselves evidential mediums. Mm-hmm. That's they're getting information from spirit that makes sense to the person with whom they're working. And so that helps them believe as well. And I think it's important to remember too, Brian, that we're all hardwired for fear. That's what keeps us alive. But most of us suffer over fear that's irrational because it's something that we've been taught either by our parents, grandparents, school, the media, whomever. And when we're in fear, the body doesn't know the difference between a real fear, get out of the road before the truck runs you over, and an irrational fear. I'm going to be late for this meeting and it feels like I'm going to die if I don't get there in time. What happens physiologically is we go into fight or flight, right? We release cortisol. The blood from our brain drains, goes down to our extremities so we can run away from that meeting that we're going to miss. Well, that doesn't make any sense, but we lose clarity when we're in fight or flight.
Yeah.
And so when we go into fear, we immediately go into fight or flight. That's what my latest book, The 2-Minute Rule, is about. We just released that a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really?
And
Tell me
it's
about
about
that.
how do you get out of that? Well, you
Yeah.
ask yourself, is this going to kill me in the next 2 minutes? It's a yes or no answer. And a lot of the time you're going to laugh. You're going to go, oh, for God's sakes, no. If I'm late to this football game where my child is playing or whatever, is that going to kill me? No, it's not, but it feels like it is. So when you ask that question, you get a no answer. What that does is it lessens the fear long enough that you can get clarity. Say, no, it's fine. They're not even going to know I'm missing because they're going to be out on the field playing or whatever. Now, when you have a thought, you think, I better get out of the road before this truck runs you over. That's a rational fear. Follow that. Get out. Get out of the road. So yeah, we have the tools to really help us be able to discern what's a real fear and what's a fake fear. And I think it's important to remember too that thoughts don't have a meaning until we give them one. And meaning in the form of emotions is an internal GPS system that we all come in with. So it helps us be led to what the next step is on our path.
Yeah, that's a really good technique. I like that, the 2-minute rule, to put things in perspective. And I 100% agree with what you're saying. Our fear response is so well tuned, and but it's there to keep us alive. And 99.9% of the time in the world that we live in, we're not in any mortal danger. But we feel like we are. And the fear that, and I grew up with fear. I grew up in a religion that taught me that there was this God that was going to judge me and stuff like that. So I grew up with that fear base. And unfortunately, I see that a lot in people still when I talk to them about mediumship or physical or spiritual healing. It's interesting. They'll go to church and they'll pray and they'll have someone lay hands on them, and I've seen people literally do this. But if I told them that I was coming to see you to have you do a spiritual healing, they'd say, well, oh no, that's not good.
Yeah. I had a woman call into my show recently and she said, well, I'm Catholic and, we're not supposed to talk to spirits. And I started laughing. I said, oh, actually, that's who you're praying to, or you're praying to saints and angels and God and Jesus and whomever. And I said, and in 2016, Pope Francis released a papal bull, which is kind of like a newsletter, that says that he was encouraging his parish pastors to welcome psychics and healers because they were doing the work of the Holy Spirit.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And I can send you a link that you can publish if you want. Yeah. And now comes with a warning. To read that stuff is just so boring. You're going to be in a coma after about the third paragraph. But my church, my parish, gives away a copy of my Angelic Attendants book to every family that comes in to plan a funeral. And my pastor says he has a copy of it on his nightstand next to his bed. He thinks it's that important. And I have churches and synagogues all across the country that give a copy of my book to families that come in to give, to plan a funeral. And I have so many people that say, yeah, that's my favorite funeral gift. Okay. If I have a loved one who's lost somebody, I'll give them a copy of your book, and it brings so much comfort to them. So yeah, that whole thing about evil spirits and all that stuff was all made up by religions to control the masses. Religions and cultures, my gosh, the ancient Greeks and you better act right or whoever, Zeus is going to throw a lightning bolt and hit you in the head.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of a thing. Yeah.
Well, it's encouraging to hear that there are churches that are opening up to that. And it hasn't aired yet, but just a couple weeks ago, I interviewed a Catholic priest who helps people who are stuck, quote unquote, cross over. And he was telling me about talking to these people. And I said, so you're talking to people that are in spirit? And he said, yes. I said, that's kind of like what a medium does. And he's like, well, I want to remain a Catholic priest, so I don't use that. We don't use that word. And so it's interesting for me that since I've been freed up from them, I'm like, okay, we're just calling things different things, right? We can pray for people. We can lay hands on people. We can ask the Holy Spirit to heal them, and all that stuff is okay. And Catholics even can pray to saints, because we don't do that in the Protestant tradition. But Catholics are praying to dead people, but don't go see a medium.
Well, Jesus is dead.
Yeah.
Everybody, Buddha's dead. All these traditions, it's all the same thing. It's all source. It's all God, whatever you want to call it. And you're right. But people can feel the energy. I live in the deep South. I got friends that I've been to their services in the Black Baptist churches. Let me tell you, there is no music like gospel music in a Black Baptist church. They raise the roof. The energy in there is just palpable. Furthermore, you think of the Gothic cathedrals with the stained glass windows, the ancient ones, stained glass windows, the pipe organs, the pitch ceilings, all of that. They were all designed to have a frequency that would help people be able to reach spirit, reach that frequency, that vibration of spirit. That's what the Gregorian chants are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're all about a vibration. And the interesting thing about the Gregorian chants, and I talk about this in my book, Angelic Attendants, is one of the most famous Gregorian chants originated in the 5th century, and it's still said at every Catholic mass, funeral mass today. And it talks about the angels and your deceased loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise.
Oh, really?
And when I was writing Angelic Attendants, I researched it to find, okay, where did that originate? 5th century. I have to believe, Brian, that back then, some of the most learned people were men living in monasteries. And maybe it took till the 5th century till somebody could read and write it well enough that they could write this down. And it's still being used today.
Yeah.
So I think when we think of things in the form of energy and vibration too, and back to those Gothic cathedrals, they were trying to get all of the senses engaged, right? You had the beautiful stained glass windows for your eyes. You had the Gregorian chants for your ears and the pipe organs and that kind of thing in the choirs. You had the candles. You had the incense. That was the olfactory. All those senses were coming together so that people could get into the frequency of spirit and communicate with spirit through prayer.
Right, right.
So we go back to the beginning, and I think we've been doing it since humans have been around.
Yeah. So you talk about also pets. Our pets will be there to greet us. And I know I've had a couple of people that I've worked with. They've said losing a pet to me has been just as hard as losing a human. So what are your thoughts on what happened with our pets when they cross over?
Their spirits are still around us, like our loved ones' spirits are. And all you have to do is think of them, and they immediately come in. Did you ever watch the TV show Bewitched?
Oh, I loved it.
When you were a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to be Samantha Stevens when I grew up, and now I am.
Yeah.
I do all the stuff she could do. So for those of you that are watching or listening that don't know what Brian and I are talking about, Bewitched was a story. It was a TV show in the 60s, and it was about a witch who was a good witch, and she married a human. And so she would yell, "Mother," or "Uncle Arthur," or "Dr. Bombay," and they would immediately come in. They would show up and she could talk to them, or she'd snap her fingers and she'd be in a different place. That's called remote viewing. That's what we call today. That connecting with whoever she wanted to talk to, that's communicating with spirit. Like I was talking about earlier, how our heads are like big satellite dishes that we can receive and transmit frequencies. Pets are the same way. We'll lose a pet and we'll think we're hearing their little nails clicking on the tile or on the hardwood floors. And we'll think, oh, that's just my imagination. No, it's not. That's your pet letting you know they're around. When our dog died, we used to hear her sigh. I could hear her sigh.
Yeah.
And my husband could too. And he'd say, well, Katie's over there in the corner. And then, of course, I could see her too. But I think it's important to remember that spirit's going to communicate with us in a multitude of ways. We may see something out of the corner of our eye. We may smell something. We may hear something. We may feel something. And it's all spirit communicating with us, sometimes in a lot of different ways simultaneously. So pets are around us all the time, and their little spirits are there. In the 12 phases of transition, I call that pet area the dog pound, whether it's dogs or other. It's like they're in this certain part of the room that I can see, and I can describe to you what the pets look like. One other important point about the 12 phases of transition also, Brian, is that everybody goes through all 12 phases, regardless of how they die. If they die instantly, like in the case of a homicide or suicide, or they die over a prolonged period of time, like days, weeks, months, even years, everybody goes through the 12 phases of transition. And remember, time doesn't exist in the spirit world. So a nanosecond may be long in the spirit world. It may not even be a thing in our understanding of it. So everybody is surrounded by angels and the deceased.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and I'm glad you made it, because I think it, again, from our human perspective, thinking of time, we think, I might think, well, this only applies to people who are going through a prolonged death, like an Alzheimer's or cancer or something like that. So you're saying even someone that transitions suddenly, it's still an orderly transition into the spirit world.
Right. And so I can do an instant replay of somebody's death. I had a woman call into my show last night, and one of her best friends had been murdered. And so she was asking questions about what happened, so we could do an instant replay and see what was going on.
So you were able to understand what would happen with her. And how do you feel about this? Because I've heard many times when people are going through a traumatic experience, for example, being murdered, that their spirit actually leaves their body before their body suffers.
It's been my experience that it's all across the board. This gal last night wanted to know if her friend suffered, and I was communicating with the friend telepathically in spirit. She was in heaven, and she said, yes, she did. And then she went on to say, I want you to focus on the fact that I'm in heaven, that everything's pure love, pure joy, and I'm around you all the time. Okay. There's no reason for you to focus on how I died or if I suffered, because there isn't anything you can do about that.
Yeah.
What you can do going forward is you can be aware that I'm around you. You can communicate with me. And so that's what we talked about. She also had a message for her mother. The gal in heaven, her spirit wanted her friend, who's still alive, to convey a message to her mother, who's alive. Okay. So you can imagine the grief is palpable. And she wanted to know, the woman who'd called into my show wanted to know, because apparently she was murdered by her boyfriend, and she wanted to know if it was on purpose. So her friend in heaven said to me, no, it wasn't. He was high.
Okay.
And I said to my caller, did he have a drug problem? She said, yes, a serious one.
Okay.
I said, he didn't intend to murder her. However, he was high and he was out of his mind. He didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully that brought that person some comfort. But, again, it goes back to that thing where I think we tend to focus on the worst possible thing, right? So we focus on the moment of the person's transition, and they have a whole life that they lived before that. They have a life that they're living now, and we're focused on that one thing that just drives us crazy.
Right. And that's a really good point, I think, and a great illustration just last night, less than 24 hours ago, where this gal in heaven, her spirit, the woman who'd been murdered, said, I don't want you to focus on how I died. I want you to focus on what's going on now. What's our relationship going forward?
It's interesting. I've had several medium readings. My daughter passed away suddenly, and it's like she doesn't really want to talk about it. I've had so many mediums, really, really good mediums. Like I'm not getting like her cause of death. I'm not getting how she transitioned. I'm like, I don't think she wants to talk about it. I think it's just not a big deal to her. I don't think it's, I try not to focus on it. People will ask me all kinds of questions and I'm like, I don't know. And it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of other interesting points along these lines of this conversation too. Number one, our relationship changes. And I talk in analogies a lot, in case you haven't figured that out yet, because it gives our human minds a frame of reference for all this stuff that we're talking about. And my frame of reference for our relationship changing is, think of a friend that you had growing up. Maybe you had a friend that lived next door and you got to see him all the time. And then you guys grew up and you moved to different cities, but you're still friends. You talk to him on the phone, you text him, whatever. You still have a relationship with him. It's just different. Mm-hmm. That's how I think of when we have a relationship that continues with a loved one who's in spirit. And I think it's important for us to remember that relationship is still there, even though it's changed some. And the other, I think, important point too, Brian, is regardless of how somebody dies, and we all go through this, we all think, well, what if we would have done this differently? What if we would have had a different doctor? What if we would have not taken them to that ball game? We wouldn't have been in the car accident, blah, 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 blah. That's all a natural phase of grieving. But I think too, it's important to remember that it's never going to make sense to us. Why it happened is never going to make sense while we're alive. Mm-hmm. We'll get it when we're in spirit with them, when we're in heaven with them, but we'll never understand it when we're alive. The other important point to mention, I believe, is we all decide when we go, where we go, how we go, and who's with us or not when we go. We're all in control. Our spirit is when we leave. Most of us that are left behind say, well, if I would have done this differently, if I would have done that differently, I hate to burst your bubble. You're not that powerful.
Right.
And every medical provider in an ICU or a CCU, every hospice person, like a nurse or another hospice chaplain or whatever, every funeral director has unlimited stories talking about the family sat with Aunt Susie for 3 weeks and I was on duty and I left the room for 3 minutes to go get a cup of coffee. When I came back, she had passed. And we said, Aunt Susie, what's up with that? We all were with you. And then you chose to leave while nobody was in the room with you.
Right.
It's all our spirit's prerogative, how we leave, when, with whom, all of that.
So do you believe we have a certain exit point or multiple exit points in terms of when it's our time to go?
It's been my experience in talking with literally tens of thousands of spirits over the years that we decide how we're going to go, when we're going to go, all of that can be decided very quickly. It's not like when we come in, we know, okay, we're going to die on April 7th at 3:17 a.m. That's not how I'm told it works. And again, this gal who's my client that I talked to this morning, she said her mom was a candidate for a liver transplant and she was in the hospital. She wanted to come home. They were getting ready for her to come home. And then she developed MRSA.
Wow.
And she was dead in 24 hours.
Wow.
And she said, she asked the same question. She said, so did my mom intend to die then? I said, and so we were talking with her mom telepathically, and her mom said, I was just so tired. I didn't want to go through this anymore. I didn't want to be a burden to the family. And I realized that somebody else could use that liver and live their lives. I had all these problems with my body. And so the MRSA came in and I took that as my ticket to ride to go to heaven. Yeah. So the whole exit point thing, I think, is us trying to make sense from a human perspective.
I think it is. And what's interesting to me, what I always say to people, I have to be careful not to be too blunt sometimes. It's like, but when we're born, the one thing we know is that we're going to die. That's the only thing we know for sure. And it's just a matter of how and when, and we view death as a tragedy. So we always want to say, oh, well, they went too soon. They could be 96 years old. They could be 116 years old. Right? Here's people, it's such a tragedy that so-and-so passed away at 95 or something. And I'm like, it's not a tragedy. I'm sorry. We're going back home. But, so especially in my case, when people lose children, they're like, we want to know, was this planned? Was this part of the plan? And I'm like, I think from my daughter's perspective, being where she is now, it doesn't matter whether you live to 15 or 80.
I agree. 100%. And we don't know what their past lives have been. We live countless past lives.
Yeah.
So perhaps your daughter lost a child in a past life. In this round, she wanted to explore what it was like to be the child.
Yeah.
To leave, or she was the friend of, or the sibling of, or the grandparent of, or the whatever of. And she wanted to explore it from that perspective. I like to use the analogy of Hamlet when I talk about past lives. And past lives are so much fun, Brian, because we can oftentimes get information that we can corroborate with historic documents online. And I always say, you can't make that stuff up.
Yeah.
And so, the Hamlet, if you think about Hamlet, we all come in with a script of things we want to explore and experience. And I'll see a semblance of that script repeat itself through multiple lifetimes. And with Hamlet, with that analogy, you think about how many times has Hamlet been performed since Shakespeare wrote it in 1602?
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
Right.
But you think about same script, different time, what was happening in the world, different language, where was it performed, by whom? All those variables come in. And it's going to give you a different perspective of that same script. And we do the same thing. And we don't really get things until we experience them. For example, go back to when you were learning to drive a car. You can read a book about it. You can watch a movie about it. You can ride in a car with somebody else driving, but until you're behind that wheel, you don't really get it.
Right.
And that's how this works too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of past lives, and I know that's a controversial subject for some people, and I'm still piecing together. I think there's some sort of continuation, and people do come back in some form or another. But it also, if you just accept the fact that you just said this is not the only, because we think, okay, well, it's not fair that this person only got 15 years, this person only got 3 months, or this person only got 2 years. And that was their entire experience of being human. And I don't think that's true at all. And I think if we can expand beyond that, then it takes a little bit of the sting out of it.
I agree. And then there are lots of schools of thought that we live concurrent lives. We're living multiple lives all at the same time. And that makes my head want to explode. When that happens. And is that, do I understand it? No.
Right.
Is it feasible? I've heard that it is. Is it feasible for me? Okay. Yeah, but I don't understand it.
So when you say concurrent lives, because I've heard that taken two ways. One is that because there is no time, that we're living past, present, and future lives at the same time. I can't say it with that same time. I've also heard people say that we can actually be in multiple bodies, that our spirit can be like, I could be Brian here and I could be Raul in Sao Paulo or something, living two different lives from my oversoul's perspective.
Exactly. And I believe what that comes down to is we're made in the image and likeness of God. And most of us think, well, God looks like Dumbledore from the Harry Potter movies, or Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings movies, Father Time, long hair, white beard, white gown, sitting on a cloud someplace. Yeah. What I believe is that we're made in the image and likeness of God in spirit form. So if God can be everywhere all at the same time, so can we. That's my perspective based on my experience. Yeah. And so that helps me kind of understand it in a different way.
Yeah, it is mind blowing. It's fun to explore. I tell people, it's like, I don't get too caught up in it, but it's fun to, when you have that perspective, like, I don't have to figure it all out, but it's fun to play with it. Right. So is there reincarnation? How does it actually work? Is it, serial lives, or they're parallel lives, or, because I've heard so many people say, well, I'm never coming back here again. And I'm like, yeah, sure.
Good luck with that.
That's what we all say, but
good luck with that.
Yeah. I think you have a different perspective once you step back a little bit.
Yeah. And I also think that when we do past life scans, of course I'm an entrepreneur, so I have to do it my own way. I
Mhm.
don't hypnotize people. I envision myself in this endless hallway and very tall ceilings, very narrow walls. And there are these big square mirrors that are perfectly lined up vertically and horizontally in columns. And
Hmm.
each mirror represents a different lifetime. So we'll ask a question like, was Brian a champion athlete in a past life?
Mhm.
And the mirrors that correlate with that question will come out from the wall as if they're on a hydraulic arm. And then I'll say, show me
Wow.
the one that correlates the most. That one will come out the farthest. It will be as if I'm walking into the mirror, I'm walking into a scene in the movie, and I'll
Hmm.
be given where it was, when it was, a little bit about what was going on, and we'll correlate it with what's happening in your current life. So it's really fascinating. Sometimes I'll get dates. And one of my favorite past life stories is about a guy who was a CEO of a huge publicly traded company here in America and global, but on the New York Stock Exchange, and he had cancer. So as part of his healing, we were doing a past life scan on him, and we got that he was an admiral in the British Navy in the late 1700s, and we got his name, and we got that he was in charge of the Atlantic Fleet, and he was famous for some big battle with the French, and we got the years and all that jazz. Well, I don't know British naval history,
Hmm.
but we looked it up, and it was all verifiable.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of my favorite examples of we'll get information and we can corroborate it with historic documents. One of my friends actually had a situation where it was Thanksgiving morning and she was at her mom's house, she and her sister, and they were fixing dinner, and they watched some antique spoons and stuff come off of the wall and fall on the countertop, all three of them. And they were like, what's going on here? So they're on the phone with me saying, what? Can you scan this? What's going on? And so I got that it was the person who owned the land where their housing development is. It was here in the Birmingham area.
Hmm.
We got the guy's name. We got that he was a farmer. We got all this other information. We got the family name. We got the years that this was transpiring. One of the grandsons was able to find the original deed of the property in historic documents, and it was all there.
Oh, wow.
Everything that we had gotten communicated to us from spirit. So that really is fun when we can get that kind of information.
Absolutely. Well, Julie, we're coming to the end of our time. Before I let you go, like we touched on your services, but if you could tell people the services that you offer, so go through the services you offer, how people can reach you.
Yeah, my buffet of psychicness includes medical, pet, deceased loved ones, communicating with spirit or whoever you want to talk to. It doesn't matter. Telling how close to death somebody is, past life stuff, and anything else that has to do with spirit. I am delighted to talk with people every day. I do my show on Thursday nights. It's live to tape. So it's a call-in show. People call in from all over the world and
Hmm.
ask Julie Ryan. And it's always fun because it's a crapshoot. I never know who's going to call. I never know what their questions are going to be or what spirit's answer is going to be. Very fast paced, very fun.
Oh, yeah.
And so askjulieryan.com. Everything's there.
Okay.
May I tell them about my books?
Absolutely.
All right. So anybody listening, if you want a free copy of any of my books, Angelic Attendants, What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next, or one of my children's books, I have 4 of them, and they are darling, Brian. Look how cute these are. The illustrations are so cute. They're
Oh, wow. Yeah.
colorful and they're kids asking angels tough questions and lots of information for them. Just go to askjulieryan.com, click on the Ask Julie button, say, hey, I heard you on Brian's show. I'd love a free copy of your book. Or if you have kids or grandkids and you want one of the kids' books, there's one for cats, dogs, kids, and the 2-minute rule for
Yeah.
kids
Oh, wow.
that we
Okay.
talked about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll send you a free digital and audiobook version just for listening as a gift.
Julie, thanks so much. That's very generous of you to do that. Thanks for being here, and great to see you again.
Thank you. My honor.
All right. Enjoy your afternoon.
You too.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at growth2growth.circle.so. That's growth2growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.